Good morning, boys and girls. It's Tuesday, e-learning for social studies. We're going to jump right in it. The Revolutionary War, the American Revolution has started. We have the colonists went against the British, and we're just going to jump into it now. There's going to be some differences between the colonists that we haven't really talked about, and so be ready for those because not every colonist had the same viewpoint. Personal hardships. The Declaration of Independence showed that colonial leaders had united against Britain, but the colonists themselves were deeply divided. Many had to decide whether to support independence, that means go to the colonist side, or to stay loyal to the British king. Some colonists were saying, the king is the king and we need to be loyal to him. So they had to take a side. Colonists who supported independence called themselves patriots. These are the ones that wanted to break away from the British. Those who remained loyal to the king were called loyalists. Yeah, that was a tough one. They really went out on a limb to come up with that one. But the colonists living in America that wanted to remain loyal to the king were called loyalists. About 1/3 of the colonists stayed neutral. They didn't pick a side. As people took sides, friendships and families were sometimes broken apart. Church groups were also divided. Taking sides was especially hard for members of the Anglican Church, also called the Church of England. The king was the head of their church. So imagine the Anglican Church was the Church of England, the leader was the king. How could you be a member of the Anglican Church and not want to stay with the British? Got a little confusing there. Also, some family members, one person in the family might have said, hey, we need to be loyal to the king, while the other one's like, no way, we need to be our own independence. And so families were divided too. Colonists faced other hardships too. Often their towns were robbed and destroyed by the British Army. In 1776, for example, British soldiers burned many areas of New Jersey. They even stole beds from colonist houses. In turn, patriots often took goods from the loyalists. In some cases, patriots destroyed their own belongings to keep them from the British. Others burned their crops so that the British could not get them for food. All right, lots going on here. The British were stealing from the colonists, the British Army. They would just go in, and if they didn't steal it, they could just destroy whatever it was. It could have been a home. It could have been whatever. They were stealing the colonists' beds. Why? Well, they didn't have a bed, and I'd rather sleep on a bed than on the ground. But that's what was going on. So because the British armies was doing this to the patriots, these are the colonists that were going against the king. The colonists going against the king started stealing from the loyalists. These were colonists that were loyal to the king. So when the British armies took from them, they took from the other colonists that were allied or agreed with the British armies. In some cases, the colonists, the patriots, the people that wanted the freedom, they would destroy their own things just so that the British army wouldn't get it. Pretty severe. Economic hardships. When you see that, you're thinking about money hardships. Along with personal problems, Americans also faced many economic hardships during the Revolutionary War. British blockades stopped ships from reaching American ports. These trade barriers, known as embargoes, caused shortages of imported goods. We talked about these blockades before. This is when the British ships were out in the ocean, and any ship that was trying to come into the harbor, they wouldn't let them. So whatever goods were on those ships never made it to the cities, and the colonists never received them. That was also called, that was that barrier that the British put up, those blockades. It was also called an embargo. They wouldn't let the ships pass. And so the colonists were not getting the things that they wanted. Prices rise. As the shortage of goods grew worse, Americans also faced inflation. Inflation is a rise in the price of all goods. Because of inflation, people needed more money to buy the same amounts of goods and services. In just 2 months, the prices of wheat and beef doubled. Another cause of inflation was the falling value of the colonial paper money called Continentals. To pay for the war, Congress printed more of the paper money. By printing too many Continentals, however, the government made them less valuable. Congress also had a difficult time trying to pay for the war. Congress could not force the states to contribute money. It could only ask them. The states could say no if they choose. Because there was a shortage of goods, some farmers and shopkeepers began profiteering or charging extra high prices for their crops and goods. Some states passed laws that limited how much farmers could charge for food. These laws also made it illegal for people to hoard or collect and hide large amounts of goods. However, these laws were often broken. Classic supply and demand. We talked about this way back when we went to BizTown. When you have a high supply of goods, the price usually is level because there's plenty to go around. But when that supply gets dropped, there's not as much to buy, and people still want to buy it, the price goes up. People are willing to pay more just to get it. Will everybody get it? No. The people with the most money will get it. That's the way it works. I don't know what's going to happen with this pandemic if things start becoming a shortage, but it's going to be classic supply and demand. We may see some stores raise their prices. Hopefully the government steps in and doesn't allow it. But there are going to be some cases where I'm sure prices of things are going to go up because the supply is going to be low and the demand is going to be high. And so it'll be interesting to watch what happens with that. Let me see. I think there was one other thing. I forget what. Oh, the paper money. What they were saying, Congress had this much of money in Continentals. When they started paying for the war, they printed more money. It was just paper. And so the amount of money out there was flooded, which actually caused the amount of money or the value of a dollar to go less. That's what happens when you flood too much into an economy. The value of the dollar can go down. When the value of the dollar goes down, that leads to inflation. What might, for example, let's just say a box of spaghetti might cost $1 because of inflation and because the dollar isn't worth as much now. When you go to the store, it might be $2. That's inflation. But what was happening, it was inflating everything. Everything, the price was going up. So when everything goes up, that's considered inflation instead of just supply and demand. I know that's a little confusing, but inflation is more of everything versus just profiteering or trying to make money off of one product. Last one for today. Women in the war. As men left their homes to fight in the war, women took on new roles. Some women ran family farms or businesses. Others raised money for the war and collected clothing for the soldiers. Some wives followed their husbands from battle to battle. Every winter when the armies were in their winter quarters, Martha Washington traveled to be with her husband George. In army camps, women cooked food and washed clothes. Some brought water to soldiers during battles. Some girls and women joined the men in battle. One night in 1777, 16-year-old Sybil Ludington rode more than 40 miles to tell the Americans of a British attack. Deborah Sampson pretended to be a man and dressed in men's clothing so that she could fight during the war. Margaret Corbin was wounded after taking her husband's place in battle. She became the first woman veteran to be recognized by Congress. A veteran is a person who has served in the military. Other women used their talents to support the patriot cause. Mercy Otis Warren wrote poems and stories about people fighting for freedom. Later, she wrote a history of the American Revolution, the first by a woman. Abigail Adams argued for freedom in letters she wrote to her husband, John. She also cared for children who had been made homeless by the war. So the women had a big part in the war. Some of them ran the family businesses, took care of the kids. Some people went to the military camps, provided care for the soldiers. They cooked for them. They took them water on the battlefield. Some women wanted to be in the war so bad that they dressed up as men to become part of the battle. That led to women being in the military. Ultimately, it took a lot of time, but that's the things that the women did during this time. They also did some crusades or they built some things that were good natured things, fighting for freedoms and caring for orphans or children left behind when their parents went into the war or something happened. So there was a lot of things that the women stepped up and did during this time. All right, so what I want you all to do now is I want you all to go to Schoology. You're going to answer a couple of questions regarding today, and we'll be back tomorrow. My plan is, just so that you all know, we're going to go through the American Revolution this week and next week. That'll be 6 days. Then we'll be in our very last week of school. The very last week of school is 3 days. We might do a little bit something different because once I get through the war, I'm not going to start anything new for 3 days. So we might do something a little bit different. All right, head to Schoology, answer your questions.